We're talking about this last week and this week, a couple of the masters of New Thought. And I might take a moment to explain what is New Thought, because some of you may not be familiar with that term. The New Thought movement is sort of a loose confederation of spiritual organizations that began in the United States in the late 1800s, and it followed a long tradition of what's called the perennial philosophy that is really very ancient, that was brought up through various sources and various avenues and so forth, through Western culture and Eastern culture, and emerged really in the United States through the Transcendentalists, Emerson and Thoreau and some of those folks, and through another fellow named Phineas Quimby, who was a clockmaker, that in some of his other work with what was then called mesmerism, that we now know as hypnotism, began to do healing work with lots of people. And one of the people that he did healing work with was a young woman named Mary Baker Eddy. And Mary Baker Eddy went on to found Christian Science, which became a huge movement in the United States on its own. And many of the people that became the New Thought leaders sort of had their initial experience in Christian Science, including Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, or the science of mind. Last week we talked about Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was at one point the second in command to Mary Baker Eddy, and then she left. And actually it's interesting because Christian Science is not considered part of New Thought today, mainly because it's considered, and by their own choice, they don't want to be considered part of New Thought. And the main reason is that they have a little more strict doctrine and dogma than the rest of the New Thought movement does. So New Thought is like us, Centers for Spiritual Living and Unity, Michael Beckwith's Agape International Ministries, Johnny Coleman's Universal Truth Centers, and there's about 9 families of New Thought. And Emmet Fox was one of the great early teachers in the middle of the 20th century, primarily in Unity, and he had a very large work in New York. He spoke at the Hippodrome, and that's a picture of one of his Sunday audiences. Back in those days, in the 40s and 50s and so forth, there were huge crowds. Ernest Holmes, when he was speaking at the Wiltern Theater and some of the other theaters in L.A., they would put 2,800 people in and turn away 2,000 on a Sunday. When Emmet Fox was speaking in New York, he would draw these crowds, and there were other speakers, including Raymond Charles Barker and so forth, that were drawing hundreds and hundreds of people at the same time. Jack Addington was in New York for a while, and others. So it's been, New Thought was very, very popular. And Emmet Fox was a prolific writer, and he was brilliant, just brilliant. So I'm going to talk a little bit about his approach to prayer. He said, scientific prayer will enable you sooner or later to get yourself or anyone else out of any difficulty on the face of the earth. Now, we should probably explain what he means by scientific prayer. We had a class the other night on Thursday about meditation and prayer treatment, and the type of prayer that we call scientific prayer or prayer treatment or spiritual mind treatment is really praying in a sense that you're praying to change your own consciousness. That's really what it's about. The work of the person praying is to change his or her own mind about something. It's not asking an external deity to do something differently than it's been doing before. Did you ever ask God to give you something and you had no intention of doing anything differently, right? You just wanted what you wanted, or you wanted to get out of a situation, I was talking to somebody who was saying somebody was sharing the other day, saying they were an atheist for a long period of life except when they were in trouble. And I think we can relate to that. There are times when you get in a tight spot and you say, okay, if you're up there, do something, right? But the type of prayer that we talk about is really about a device or a technology, if you will, to create an inner psychological transformation within the one praying, to create a new belief or series of beliefs around a certain issue, because we recognize that our experience of life is based upon our belief at any given time about what is truth, what is reality, what's really going on. And that changes in belief at a deep level create profound changes in the experience of life. Okay, so scientific prayer will enable you sooner or later. Now, by sooner or later, he means when you get the inner belief changed. Sometimes that's a long conversation with yourself, right? I mean, you figure you didn't get the way you are overnight. What's the likelihood of you radically changing overnight? So quite often we pray or do the treatment over and over and over in order to make the inner transformation. And it's not like, some people say, well, isn't one treatment enough? And the answer to that is yes, if there's a demonstration. If you don't have the demonstration, keep on treating. Well, does that mean that that treatment didn't do anything? No, it doesn't mean that at all. When you do one prayer treatment, one process, you may have made a dent in your existing belief. You may have begun to build an alternate belief, but it doesn't have enough energy within it to become dominant within your own consciousness. My teacher, when we learned this, used to say it's sort of like taking a hammer and hitting a rock. And every time you hit the rock with a hammer, a little piece breaks off. And it may take 10,000 whacks of the hammer to really break the rock down. And if you have a strong inner belief, it can take a long time to really process by what you're really doing is providing an alternative belief that's building up beside it. If you watch the Super Bowl that was played at the Meadowlands in a relatively new stadium. And before that stadium, there was another stadium that was right beside where the current stadium is. So what they did was they built the new stadium and then they tore the other one down. And it's sort of like that's what we do. The dominant belief within your subconscious mind, whatever it is in relation to any issue, is the law of your life until a new belief becomes more dominant, which means it has more energy to it. So I might believe I'm a failure, I'm a success, just as an example. And as long as I'm a failure has more energy, which means I think about it more with feeling, then that will be my automatic default setting. The other belief is there, but it doesn't have enough energy to become default. So the idea is to feed the one you want until it surpasses the other one, the negative belief, let's call it, or the fear-based belief, with energy, and then you have automatically a new default setting. Now, you might think, I can't think of an example in my life where that's happened. Did anyone go from first grade to second grade? Did anyone have that experience? Okay, one day, initially you're not just a little kid. Then all of a sudden you're in first grade. And at some point in that process, you become, in your own mind, you accept yourself as a first grader. It doesn't feel weird or strange anymore. It might take a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And then there's a time near the end of that school year where you can't wait for the last day of school because as soon as school is over, I'm a second grader. See? And that really represents a change in consciousness. It would be weird to go back to first grade after that because you've had that change. And that's an example of what I'm talking about. So I can have a first grade mentality that says I'm weak, I'm sick, I'm, poor me. But I want to replace that with the second grade and maybe up through graduate school levels of thinking that, success, of course I'm a successful person. I have gifts and talents that I naturally bring to everything I do. I expect things to go well. So that's what he's talking about. Scientific prayer, sooner or later, depending upon the energy you put into it, depending upon what's the strength of the old belief, and it's not really about being concerned about the strength of the old belief, but recognizing that you may treat about some things, feeling like you're really doing a good job, and not necessarily see the change right away. Doesn't mean that nothing's happening on the inside, but you won't tend to see the results until the inner transformation is complete. All change begins first on the inside and works its way out. Okay? He said, in scientific prayer, it is God who works and not you. So And so your particular limitations or weaknesses are of no account in this process. And by God, he's talking about the creative process as you, not something separate or beyond you. It's that part of you that operates in your subconscious mind that simply takes care of things automatically. You know, if I've got a screwed up attitude about myself in the world, I will have a screwed up experience of myself in the world. I don't have to really put a lot of energy into that. It'll just be that way. If I develop or I have a really positive attitude, a high set of expectations, seeing myself as a high performance person, that will tend to happen in my life. I don't have to put a lot of energy to make that happen. Once I have the consciousness, it just kind of is. You see? Now, there may be a process of getting there, but once you're there, it's just kind of automatic. If you look at the Olympic athletes, you know, the difference between those top 3 or 4 or 5 positions in any sport is not talent. They're all pretty equally talented. I mean, they're all within 100th of a second of each other in some of the, you know, faster sports. And you know, the skaters, you can just say skating's pretty subjective. You know, the judges like what they like and so forth. But what really makes the difference at that level of performance is the attitude with which you step onto the field or onto the court or onto the slopes. Are you able, in a sense, to get out of your way mentally and let your true genius and true talent express more fully 100th of a second better than the person behind you if you're in a competitive environment? That's the real difference. So they all have mental coaches as well as coaches for their sport. It's very critical. So that's what he's talking about here. Your weaknesses don't matter, because sometimes we'll start to do our prayer and say, oh, God, help me. I know I'm a tragic wretch. You know, I know I'm clumsy. I know I'm stupid. I know I don't get things easy. You know. But see, that doesn't matter. There's nothing within you that is bound by your past, except your own belief that you are. When your thoughts reinforce a negative past, the negative past stays in the present. But nothing in your past continues to affect you unless you're currently thinking about it. Because, you know, we know in the subconscious mind, when you get into the mind, not so much the brain structure is the vehicle for the mind, but the mind itself, your thoughts and feelings, there is no time in there. There's no time and no space, so there is no history. There's no past. It's either now or nothing. So some of us had stuff happen to us a long time ago that was tragic. And we're saying we're still affected by it. Well, we're still affected by it because every day in some way we've built in a pattern of thinking, a habit pattern that continuously brings it up and reinforces. If not the specific incident, it brings up how we learn to feel about ourselves as a result of that. So that's where we've got to shift. You know, they say, there's a saying in New Thought, principle is not bound by precedent. What he talks about, the God who works within you, which is your pure potential, your highest self, is in no way limited by your past. And as I say that, I can, you know, some of you are probably thinking, oh yeah? You don't know my life. You don't know all the crap I've had to deal with. You don't know how tough it's been for me. And I say, see? Who's saying that? I'm not saying it. You are. So, there was a great Byron Katie in her first book, Loving What Is, where she worked with a woman. I've talked about this before, but it does apply here. You think, you know, how much can it be true? And there was a woman that, what you do if you go to a Byron Katie workshop is you fill out a thing called a Judge Thy Neighbor worksheet. And a Judge Thy Neighbor worksheet is some grievance that you have about someone else from the past. It could have been someone who betrayed you. It could have been someone who injured you or assaulted you. And you would say, what is it that you're upset about? Well, you kind of get up with, like, he shouldn't have betrayed me. Well, this woman's grievance was against the Nazis. She'd been in Auschwitz and saw her whole family die around her. And her thing was they shouldn't have done that. So Byron Katie brings her up onto stage, and this is in the book, so I'm not seeing a video or anything. It's just something I read. Brings her up on the stage, and then she takes you through a process. She says, tell me what the thing is. And she said the Nazis shouldn't have done what they did to the Jews. And Byron Katie then takes you through a thing called the work. And the work begins with a question. First question is that true? That they shouldn't have done that? And most people, when they ask that question initially, say, yeah, that's true. They shouldn't have done it. And the next question is, can you be absolutely certain that that's true? And here's where Byron Katie usually makes the point to say, when you say someone shouldn't have done something and they did it, you're arguing with reality. Is that even the right issue? They shouldn't have done it. They did it. You can't undo something that's been done. So if I stay in the place of they shouldn't have done it, I'm arguing with reality. And when I argue with reality, in other words, I can't accept what happened, I suffer. It's just a given. See? And the next question she asks is, how would you be without that thought that they shouldn't have done it? And she said, well, I'd feel free. I'd feel at peace. And he said, well, okay. He said, when did you get out of the camps? She said 1945, and that had been 55 years at that point when the book was written. So 55 years later, you're still in the camps, sweetheart. Who's the Nazi? It's kind of hard to hear, huh? But you see, the point was this. She kept herself there by reaffirming it every day for 55 years. Did she have to think that way? No. And I won't trivialize it by saying it was a choice. It wasn't a choice so much as it was a habit pattern that was fallen into without the awareness to know there was an alternative. I don't have to harp on what went wrong. I don't have to dwell on my past wounds and injuries. I don't have to wish that there was some kind of an obvious moral response to the failings of someone else and make my life miserable because that hasn't occurred. But many people do. And when you confront them with that kind of thinking, the initial reaction is, how dare you question me? Because as we're doing that process, we're building the justification. A human being psychologically can't do anything that you don't feel is justified in the moment. No matter how crazy, outrageous, cruel, or horrible the act, in the moment, you have to feel justified in order to do something. And that doesn't just apply to those who are victimizers, it applies to the victim. I have to feel justified in feeling like a victim, or I can't feel like a victim. What I sometimes forget is, in my justification and my righteousness about being victimized, is once the victimization is over by the other person, I'm the one that's carrying it forward. Because the other person, they may be dead, they may be gone, they may be out of your life. They shouldn't have done that. So my limitations and weaknesses, he says, are of no account in this process. See, in order to manifest the full effect of scientific prayer, as he describes it, or treatment as we would call it, I have to work on being free of my own thought processes that hold me back from accepting more good. And a lot of it we're not even aware of, that we're doing it. It just seems like that's what we do. We've gotten in the habit of it. It's like we walk around with a big V on our forehead. I'm a victim. And we make sure people know it when we meet them, because you train people around you how to treat you. See? Before you take advantage of me, I want you to know I've been victimized. You know, and then you'll find somebody else that's a victim, and then you'll have victim parties. You call it going to lunch. So here's the simple thing that Emmet Fox came up with about this. He said, stop thinking about the difficulty, whatever it is, and think about God instead. How much time do you spend thinking about your problems? Worrying about them, ruminating over them. You know, whatever your problems are, everybody's got a problem, right? And your biggest problem is your biggest problem. Right? My biggest problem may be bigger than your biggest problem, but you're not concerned about my biggest problem. You just know your biggest problem is your biggest problem. It may be you're out of stamps, you know? I don't know. But your biggest problem is your biggest problem, and we think about our biggest problem, and then we do. You ever do? I do this about once a month. I've gotten it down to once a month. I stay awake all night and I do my inventory. I think I'm going to go to sleep, but after a couple hours, it becomes obvious that I'm not going to sleep because there's an inventory of stuff that isn't done, of stuff that needs to be corrected, of stuff that that's on my agenda. And I've got to figure out, and there's always a couple of difficult conversations in there that I'm trying to avoid. So I have to run through 12 or 15 variations on each one of those conversations. You know, there's always some financial stuff in there. There's some scheduling stuff there. It's all that stuff, right? So what I've started to do when I start to have inventory night, and I become aware that it's inventory night, is I stop and I do prayer treatment. And I fall asleep in about 15 minutes. I think about God instead. Now it takes a little discipline because inventory night is very insistent. I know people that have inventory night every night. But it's very insistent. Why? Because it's a habit we've gotten into. For most of us, it's an overindulgence in soul responsibility. We feel responsible for everything. If I don't do it, the world will stop. I don't even want to think about what will happen if I don't complete my inventory. People will die. Worlds will collide. The earth will quake and rattle. Storms will come. It will rain frogs. Whatever it is that you think about, what will happen if you don't follow through on everything you're supposed to do. And then there's all the people you've got to worry about, and you're doing their inventory for them. You're stalking people. Can I help you? Can I help you? Can I worry about you? Can I worry about some of your stuff? See? So what if I stopped thinking about that and I just thought about God? What do you mean think about God? I don't know. Think about whatever you want relating to God. God is the infinite presence that is pure love. God is the part of you that is never in trouble, that never has a problem, that is never sick. It's the part of you that when you're sick, it knows you're sick, but it isn't sick. You know that part of you that's observing you being sick. Gee, I'm sick. Well, not me, but the body is sick, right? So think about that. Think about what could be. Put your energy, and the thing is, what we fail to understand is our thoughts aren't reactive, our thoughts are creative. They may come out of the swirl of our consciousness, but when we take direction and dominion over our thoughts, we create a consciousness that will, out of that will come, instead of rumination and fear, it will come a sense of well-being and joy. It's just as easy for your mind to produce a steady output of positive ideas and thoughts as it is to put it at a steady output of fearful ideas and worries. And your mind really doesn't care what you do. It's up to you to direct it. Your mind is like a symphony. There's all different aspects and elements to it. And if you're not a good conductor, everybody starts playing their own stuff. Stop thinking about the difficulty, whatever it is, and think about God instead. And if you do that for just a couple minutes, then you go back to how do I now see the issue? Can I reframe the issue as a result of those few moments in kind of a sacred place? The issue will tend to look different. It'll feel different. It's not that there'll be an instant resolution, but you can get to the place where you feel that you're able to be in relationship to whatever it is that had been bothering you on a different, higher, more powerful level. He said, this is the complete rule, and if you only do this, the trouble, whatever it is, will presently disappear. It makes no difference what kind of trouble it is. Well, I've got some big problems. Got too much month at the end of the money. Got an IRS SWAT team around the house. Whatever it is. He says it will disappear. Why? Why would he say that? Because it came from your mind. Whatever it is. You know, a problem can completely change for you to become resolved, and the external situation can be exactly the same. Because sometimes the only problem is that you think it's a problem. Give you an example, current example. I see this on Facebook quite a bit. It seems to be tremendous concern around the nation with young men that don't pull their pants up. Now, this is serious business. There have actually been local governments that have passed laws that your pants have to be pulled up. So the police are now out investigating slouchy pants. I know you got a burglary, but I got a whole bunch of kids down at the 7-Eleven with slouchy pants. And there are people that are in a state of moral outrage over slouchy pants. That's a choice, people. That's not some people that, well, anybody would be upset at that. No. Just people that are looking for something to be upset at. You got to really be looking for something to be upset about if that upsets you. And you say, well, that's not true. I just want to have some decorum and respect. And come on, I've seen you behave. When you get real about it, when you get serious about it, it's something that irritates you because it reminds you maybe of some freedom that you would have liked to have had when you were that age that you don't have, or something like that. It's all that kind of crazy crap in our mind, that we're resentful that we got held in and weren't free, and we see someone else acting free and we get all upset. Let's make a law. Let's hire more police. Let's get some zoning enforcement in here. It's called the captain of the world syndrome. I had a friend, Lou Tice, told this story one time. He used to see himself as captain of the world. He was going around shaping everybody up. He said he was driving home in his neighborhood when this is some time ago, and he saw a couple of young kids there, about 12 years old, sitting there smoking cigarettes. And he stopped and got out of the car, and he says, what are you kids doing? He took their cigarettes away. He said, well, get home to your mother. He said then he got home and he had 11 kids. They were all adopted. They were all foster and adopted kids. They were all troubled kids. He had 11 kids. He walked in the house, wants to sit down and relax. He walks in and there's an ice cream cone on top of the TV that's melted down across the screen into a puddle on the floor. What the hell's going on? Get those kids in here. Kids come in. What are you doing? Get out of here. And that kid's up in his room. Another kid's sitting there fidgeting while he's studying. Get up in your room. And so pretty soon he says, I'm sitting there by myself. And I'm exhausted, shaping up the whole world all day. And his wife said, why don't you stop? He said, it had never occurred to me before that I could. He'd say, but nobody cares. He said, you ever think you might be making the world worse by being captain of the world? Nobody likes you. Well, that's what comes with being a leader. He's trying to that's what you do. You rationalize your crazy positions in life. You rationalize your irrational ideas and beliefs. If you're an addict, you know what I'm talking about. So he said, finally, I quit my position. He actually sat down and wrote out a resignation letter to the universe. And he resigned as captain of the world. And he said, the world has run a whole lot better since he quit. It's funny, but it's true. Don't we do this? Don't we should on people a lot? You really should sit up straight, get your hand out of your face, that kind of thing. He says, do not try to form a picture of God, which of course is impossible. Work by rehearsing anything or everything that you know about God. So as you think about this, like doing the first step of prayer treatment, what ideas and images and feelings of the divine can I bring into my consciousness that will elevate me? That's all I want to do. We don't see God as having an image. We see God as being the infinite all that there is, everything that we could never fully know all of. So anything you think of that's good would be God. And over time you expand your idea. Make your God bigger all the time. He said God is wisdom, truth, inconceivable love. God is present everywhere, has infinite power, knows everything, and so on. It matters not how well you think you understand these things. Just go over them. Just repeat them. Just think them. Feel them. Feel them. Feel them. Feel them. Read Rumi. Rumi, people, it's getting to be Valentine's Day, so people are giving Rumi poems to each other, thinking that's their romantic poems. Well, they are, but they're romance with the divine, not with another person. Rumi was in love with the divine, was drunk on the wine, which is the spirit-filled nature of what we can possibly be when we're fully enthused about life. One of our ministers years ago used to call God the big orgasm. Who invented the orgasm? You don't have to do that if you're uncomfortable with it, but that's okay. Reverend Helen Street called him Big Sweetie. Just think about Big Sweetie, honey. You'll be fine. He says, do not try to think out in advance what the solution to your difficulty will probably turn out to be. Leave the question of ways and means strictly to God. Your internal process knows how to get you where you're going. That's too long. I'm not reading that. I didn't want to. It's okay. I'll put it on Facebook later. You can see it. Stop thinking about the difficulty, whatever it is, and think about God instead. Man, if we all just did that a few times a day, you could knock an hour of sleep off your sleep schedule, because that's your recovery time from all the craziness in your mind. You wouldn't need it. So if you want to read some of Emmet, the Sermon on the Mount is one of his classic books about looking at the metaphysical interpretation of the Sermon on the Mount. He did one on the Ten Commandments as well. And the Golden Key is a little tiny pamphlet that says, stop thinking about the problem and start thinking about God. In essence, and why that's effective. Let's just write down, just close your eyes and think about God. Didn't that feel good? Thank you and namaste. Maureen, come up and amaze us, will you?